that knowledge with other people and watching them improve and make their work sites safer. So I'm hoping that the book can do that for a lot more people than I was exposed to before.
All right. Yeah. So thanks very much, Arnold. I think we'll have lots of questions later, and people are starting to dial in. I think lots of them have found the proper link now on LinkedIn. So for those of you who are there, we've had some technical difficulties. Sorry for the delay, but we are properly getting started now. Arnold will start reading a part of the book shortly. So in the meantime, if you're tuned in, it would be great if you could just say hi, I'm here, so we kind of have an interaction with you. Start thinking of questions and post them in the comment section as well. And then Aditya and I will manage the Q&A, and Arnold will give his answers later. So with that, Arnold, is over back to you, and well, please read part of the book of your choice.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. And I'll try to keep it short and leave room for questions. Before I get started, though, I just want to make sure I had the opportunity to recognize you, Joachim, and the entire Drops Asia and Drops organization for being out in front and leading really the awareness and tool development for dropped objects around the world. And then also to DropSafe for continuing to sponsor this event. This isn't the first one they've sponsored, and really, really very worthwhile activity to sponsor. So thank you both. Yeah, so I'm going to read most of the introduction. I think I'll skip a few paragraphs, but of the book. But I think it number one provides a bit of a summary of what the book has, so that might be useful to you. And it also includes a pretty, one of the stories that kind of gets back to the first question that Aditya asked about what ignited my passion. It talks about, most of these stories in the book are that they're all fictional, but they're based on real events. Usually, a composite of multiple things that I saw while I was in the job. But I think you'll get why I became so passionate about dropped objects and wanted to write the book. Okay, so I'll get started. From the introduction. This is about 6 or 7 minutes, just so you know what to expect, and then I think we'll get back to the Q&A. I'm not one that needs photos of blood or broken bones to motivate me to prevent people from being hurt. I read enough incident reports to know human beings will make mistakes, and the consequences can be grave. Too many cases where a few feet here or a few seconds there can make the difference between going home alive or not. Our safety controls can fail. Multiple layers of protection are needed so that no one is hurt when mistakes are made or safety controls fail. In other words, fail safely. In addition, the mitigation of the risk of dropped objects is less understood than control of other hazards, such as confined space entry and working at height. I worked with leaders who understood the risk but not the controls, and others who denied it was even a problem. These challenges motivated me to write this book because lives are at stake. I responded to many close calls with dropped objects under my watch, causing me to redouble my efforts. Some of these incidents affected me more than others, the ones on my project, the ones involving my teammates, the ones I saw. It shouldn't be that way, but it was. Ted, a safety inspector on my team, worked at a site that was expanding a tank farm as a part of a larger project. He had married his bride just before the project began. His job was to observe work practices at the front line, coach workers to work safely, and identify site-wide improvement opportunities. He departed the construction office every morning with a full backpack, knowing he needed to carry everything he needed until lunchtime: his snacks, water bottle, notebook, extra gloves and safety glasses, and treats for workers deserving more than a pat on the back. One morning, he was inside of a nearly built tank approaching a work crew dismantling a scaffold. He did not see the mechanic and his helper preparing to remove a hatch from the roof of the tank. Ted heard, "Watch out!" then a big clang right behind him. He turned to find a large wrench 10 feet away and a corresponding dent in the steel tank floor. Two scaffolders saw him cower and ran over to him. Are you okay? They relaxed as they saw him straighten up. Yeah, I wasn't hit. I just ducked when I heard the warning. I'm not sure why. It wouldn't have done any good. Did one of you drop that wrench? Oh no, we tie our wrenches off with lanyards. I think it came from up there, both pointing to the hole in the roof of the tank. Two wide-eyed faces stared at them through the hatch on the roof of the tank, one covering his mouth with his hand. Are you all right? One of them yelled, his voice echoing in the tank. A friendly gesture, but a little too late. They had no idea Ted and the scaffolders were below them. Ted and his wife were expecting their first child in 6 months. As he looked back and forth between the wrench and the hatch, he wondered how his yet-to-be-born son or daughter would fare without a father. Ted worked for me. The site manager and I were responsible for making sure he was around to witness the birth of his child. This incident, and a few others like it, led me and the team to change how we managed the risk of dropped objects at that site and others. To make a long story short, it worked, but more on that later. Ted experienced the birth of his son 6 months later, as he should. This book presents the fundamentals of preventing harm from dropped objects. It includes a menu of controls and practices that can significantly reduce dropped objects at your site. Specifically, the book covers the following aspects of dropped objects: the extensive scope of the dropped object problem, the potential risk of dropped objects, the different types of dropped objects, controls to prevent the different types, how to use a safety management system to bolster these controls, where else to go for help, and what people in various roles can do to prevent harm from dropped objects. The 5 key steps to reduce harm from dropped objects are: number 1, identify your priority focus area. There are 3 types of dropped objects, from elevated work, elevated equipment, and material movement. Focus on the most important first. Number 2, document and communicate mandatory requirements. How do workers know what is expected of them if you don't tell them? Number 3, resource the plan. Provide materials and people to enable implementation at the front line. Number 4, lead through coaching and verification. Initiate the change and actively support it. And finally, number 5, learn and adjust. Monitor the effectiveness of the change and adjust as needed. I've heard many excuses that stymie progress at different sites. After reading this book, you should be able to challenge the skeptics in your own organization who offer similar excuses. That could never happen. Nothing could fall from here. The area was barricaded. No one could have been hurt. My inspectors will find any potential dropped objects while performing their structural inspections. Why change anything? But I'm not working at height. I'm on a permanent platform. Our equipment's not so high. Dropped objects is not a problem here. All of our people use tool lanyards. All they have to do is go to the tool room and ask for one. Dropped objects is just one of hundreds of safety hazards leaders must manage. Most safety books aim to help leaders improve safety culture or overall safety performance. Those are important and necessary, but this book focuses on how to eliminate harm from dropped objects. Whatever your safety leadership approach is, your organization still needs detailed technical knowledge of the hazards they face to protect themselves from harm. This book provides much of that for dropped objects. That being said, many of the concepts presented here will help you reduce other safety incidents as well. Concepts such as focus, leading indicators, risk-based decision-making, learning from incidents, and contractor engagement. The multiple dimensions of dropped objects and dozens of good practices may initially be overwhelming. Don't worry, no one uses them all, especially at first. Eliminating dropped objects is hard work, and you'll have to make changes to be successful. Stephen Covey once said, to achieve goals you never achieved before, you need to start doing things you've never done before. Start the journey by committing to continuous improvement and implementing the most beneficial practices or controls. This book will help you select the focus actions that will improve performance the most. In other words, it can help you save lives. So that's the end of the introduction, and so hopefully it provided you a nice little introduction to the book and a little more insight as to why I wrote the book. So back to you, Joachim.
Excellent. Thanks very much. I'm going to ask Aditya in a second to kick off the Q&A. But in the meantime, yeah, I would like to invite you all to post your questions. They're going to come in to us, and you can see on the screen there's this, people posting questions or posting comments here. But most of it is hello, how are you? Next step, I would like to hope to see some questions from you all coming through. But we've prepared a few questions, so we'll get started with that while you think of something. I see, for example, Faisal has actually already read the book. But even if you haven't read the book and you have a question about dropped objects, you're welcome to ask. I can imagine you might still have to get to it. So with that, can I hand it over to you, Aditya, to ask the first question?
Yeah, sure. So one interesting point that came forward as Arnold was speaking that in his book he mentions about three types of dropped objects. Traditionally in industry we talk about two types. That is one is dynamic and second one is static. Whereas this is something different. So if you can throw some more light on this, that why we should be considering these three types of drop objects, that would
Yeah,
be helpful for, I think, all the audience.
yeah, great question, Aditya. I figured that would be one of the first ones. Um, and first of all, let me say, static and dynamic. I think most people on the call are probably familiar with that. Those came out long ago from the oil and gas drilling industry and the drops organization, and have served them well. They've worked well for that business. Like I said a little bit earlier, I worked with lots of other different parts of the business as well. And what I found is that just categorizing that way wasn't the most beneficial for them. In fact, some people would get a bit confused with the terminology. So the other thing I found is that when you look at the different types of dropped objects, whether it's say a scaffolder that is handling clamps and poles 100 feet in the air, or overhead equipment like light fixtures, TV cameras, etc., that may have their fittings corrode over time and fall, or unloading a flatbed truck, at the warehouse. You can have drops from all of those different types of activities, but the controls are quite different. And I felt like breaking them into three categories versus two allowed me to better connect the controls with the type of dropped object. So the biggest difference is, I'd say, that the static drops kind of map over to the elevated equipment type that I use in the book. But the dynamic is broken into what I call work at elevation. So those are, if you think of construction activity, which I think you're involved in a lot of, Aditya, that's one of the dominant courses there. So you've got people handling materials and people that need to apply controls directly during their work, right? And then material movement is the other one. So that's where the cranes and the forklifts and the trucks and even hand carrying materials, up stairways comes in. And I found it is better to talk about those separately, so you could kind of attack different parts of the problem systematically. Good question. And by no means am I trying to convince the drilling people that they should switch from static and dynamic. If it works for you, keep using it, and not trying to convince you otherwise. I'm just trying to make it a bit more universal to other types of exposures.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. I
Thanks.
mean, it gives a different, sorry, Joachim. So it gives a different perspective, and it kind of forces a person. When I got to learn about it, it's okay. Why should not we looking at things from different angle? Why we only talk about it? Has it really helped the industry? So there are a lot of questions that crop up when we think from a different perspective. So Thanks for that. And I've got just one more follow-up question regarding your book. So, as your book is available freely on platform, anyone can go buy it online in a hard copy or a soft copy format. But when you were writing this book, then what was the intention that for whom you wanted to write a book? What's that target reader?
Yeah, thanks. I actually had a paragraph or two about that in the introduction. I skipped that just in the interest of time, but happy to come back to that because it is important. And I think, hopefully we have a mix of, we probably have a mix of HSE or safety professionals and line managers on the call, and others, of course. I'd say in theory, the book was really the person I had in mind when I was writing the book is a line manager who is ultimately accountable for safety. And probably, I don't know, depending on the size of the organization, 2, 3, 4 layers up from the person at the front line with the tools. Now, in practice, the audience is quite a bit bigger than that. I suspect most of the people that have, read the book so far are probably safety or HSE professionals, and and that's fine. I think different layers of leadership, can benefit as well. Quite often the line leaders, excuse me, are looking to the HSE departments in their organization to provide them with advice, provide them with ideas, develop programs and that sort of thing. So the book provides, a lot of information to help you an HSE professional do that. But it's also a lot about how to lead those changes to improve that in your organization. And probably the number one lesson that I learned over my 35 years is that you don't make a lot of progress with absolute commitment from the line managers. It's very different for safety people, HSC people, to drive a big change by themselves. So there's a lot of, and you can tell a little bit of that from the introduction, a lot of emphasis on that in the book because it's absolutely essential. And then for line leaders, whether you're a frontline supervisor, there's a lot of discussion about the kinds of controls, when to use different controls. So that kind of information would be very useful to them. But if you're a CEO or a site manager of a very large site, you don't necessarily need to know all the details there. But you do need to understand the kind of the scope of the problem and what kind of resources involved, because that's what they need to do. They need to convince the organization that it's important to do this, and they need to provide the resources. And then, as long as they continue to support that, the benefits they seek generally take place.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much. Joachim, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and just to echo that, I think it's a very good and kind of efficient way of downloading the information. And just to come back for a second to the definitions of dropped objects and a bit of historical context. I think in the drilling industry, for a long time, maybe not a long time, but for in the beginning part, when we talked about dropped object prevention, we talked about inspections. In fact, most of the time I would speak to a drilling manager and we ask them, or a rig manager, and ask them, okay, so what does your drops program look like? The first thing they would say, yeah, we've got an inspection team coming over every 2 years, and then what else? And then often it would even be quiet after that, right? So at some moment in time, we just realized that, hey, we're all talking about these static dropped objects, and that's when we introduced the term dynamic dropped objects, just to clarify that, hey, it's not only about those overhead equipment, there's a lot more going on, and that's why we kind of introduced that. But if you were to just take a step back and you were to define the terminologies from scratch, then maybe we wouldn't have come up with that. But of course, this is what everyone is familiar with.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's interesting you say that because what I found was almost the opposite when I go into, say, some of the manufacturing type locations, is that the first thing that they came to their mind were the scaffolders and the mechanics and the electricians working up, on the fifth deck of a big, processing plant. And, the inspections, they were doing a lot of inspections, of course, but they were for other things. And it wasn't so much for dropped objects. So, a lot of my efforts there were to try to educate them on where the drilling organization started, over a decade ago, to say, hey, there's some good practices here that have been proven to be effective.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, we have the corrosion and vibration, which is a big contributor in the drilling sector, and that's why probably that focus on the inspection. Okay, so we got a question from John Ospina. We can say that gravity never sleeps and vibration too. Yeah, that particularly in our sector. Gravity plus vibration is a good way to teach about dropped objects in workplaces where people say nothing could fall from here. You want to respond to that, John? Arnold?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the question is there, but from the context, but I'll give it a shot, and then John, you can tell us if it doesn't hit the mark. But yeah, I mean, spent the book spends a fair bit of time talking about why the problem of dropped objects is so hard to solve, and all the different causes and everything. Of course, those two things are related. And also, I mentioned it, right, I keep quotes here, nothing could fall from here. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard that, but when you're around these sites long enough, you start to see things that you never can believe that could happen. So that's why it's really important to think of all the various causes. So vibration's one, but corrosion, improper design, inadequate design, those sorts of things, and really think through what could fail. Not, did it happen here before, or but what actually could fail, and then put the controls in place to solve that. So in this case, there's, if you think about it, vibration. So the best thing, of course, you can do is to eliminate or even prevent that source of vibration, right? So that's the first thing you can do. And then, in some cases, you can put another control of that. So if it does vibrate, then loose, then how can I prevent that from hurting somebody, right? So that's where, the safety tethers and the nets and those sorts of things come in, so that if something falls, it doesn't fall far. It's basically restricted to the immediate area, and it won't hurt anybody. It still felt a little bit, it came loose, but it didn't hurt anybody, which is really what we're after. And then another thing that you can do if the situation's maybe a net's not practical or something, a big piece of equipment, is you can exclude people from the area, and until you can get the root of the problem fixed. So that's not as good a control. Unfortunately, it's relies on people to recognize that exclusion area and respect it. But it is another control you can use.
Exactly. Thanks.
I hope I answered your question, John. If I'm not, I'm not sure if it was a question or a comment, but just let us know, but with another comment.
Yeah. Thanks, Arnold and John. If there's any further follow-up questions, just post them. And anyone else, also, post your questions. I see some are coming through. Aditya, would you like to
Yeah, we've
facilitate
got
those?
one very interesting question that caught my eye from Duncan Fraser. So he says drops has been around now from about 2008, as I understand. Would you say that there is more ready acceptance of the drops philosophy now, without as such coercion that had to be employed when it was first introduced, or do attitudes still need changing even now?
Yeah, good question. And I think it varies depending on where you're at. There's, all kinds of different safety cultures and levels of maturity around the world, even, within the same location, depending on the company cultures. So it really depends on where you're at. I think, overall, from my exposure to the people in the oil and gas drilling industry, um, from what I saw, there's pretty ready acceptance, to use your words, of what needed to be done. They were always looking to further improve. They've got a pretty big toolkit already, but every time they had a near miss or made an unusual observation, always trying to find other ways to prevent those types of dropped objects. Some of the other industries, so the wind industry right now, of course, is growing at a very rapid pace, and probably pick up even more. A lot of dropped object exposure there, and they've partnered with drops over the past few years to really customize the controls, prevention controls for their industry. But when you look, at some of the other, types of industries and settings around the world where dropped object exposure exists, and sometimes a lot, you don't see as much. You can go to, a drilling rig, for instance, and see a lot of tethers and nets and that sort of thing. But you can go to, maybe another onshore type facility that has similar types of exposure, but you don't see those types of things. So part of that is awareness and education. So that's, something I'm trying to help with the book and things like this. But part of it is also just making the commitment to really make a difference there.
Yeah, absolutely. You very rightly said that there is a wide range. So to give a very specific answer to this question is a bit difficult. But in general, we can say in the industry, day by day, more and more organizations are becoming aware and they are adopting it as part of their safety culture. So awareness sessions, trainings, they are just getting inculcated into the overall HSE management systems. So yeah, that's really good.
All right. So we have a next question from Zaeri Zalkofri. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Thank you, Mr. Arnold. My question is, in a proactive safety culture, what are the proactive steps taken by organizations to prevent drops based on your experience? And do you see this as a responsibility of asset in a proactive culture?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that question, because it's something I'm very passionate about. And first of all, you do need a proactive safety culture to really solve this problem, as with you do with other hazards that exist as well. To answer the second part first, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I said earlier, I'm a very firm believer that for any of this to be successful, it has to be the responsibility of the asset, or line management, depending on how you want to call it. They're the ones that are accountable for safety. The safety departments are there to enable them, provide them with tools, advice, assurance, all those coaching, all those sorts of things, subject matter expertise. But they really don't have the authority, at least in all organizations I've worked with, to actually make a change and put funds toward things like that and that sort of thing. So the accountability and the responsibility, rests there. Now, as far as what can be done, I guess let me highlight a couple things. I kind of outlined the 5 steps in the introduction, but a couple key ones are first of all to, I say several times in the book, if you anticipate a dropped object, you can prevent it. So it comes down to, if you don't think about it, you'll be surprised, right? If you don't try to anticipate what might happen, if something falls, you'll be surprised, and you had no opportunity to prevent it because you didn't really identify it earlier. So the first thing is to really try to anticipate, given your activities or your equipment and infrastructure, what could fall and how could it fall, and then you can put the things in place to make sure it doesn't fall, or at least it doesn't hurt anybody. That's another distinction I probably need to come back to after this question. The second thing, and some people stop there, but I think one of the most important, effective tools I found, and this is not just for dropped objects, you could use this for anything, is so you identify controls that need to be put in place, lanyards that need to be used, fences that need to be put up, tarps that need to be laid down, exclusion zones that need to be, very recognizable and respected. Go out and check how well are those being used. Are they being used at all? Are they being used effectively? Do you see different controls with different work parties doing the same exact thing with the same exposure? And from that, you can take all that information and then go back and remove the obstacles that are preventing people from doing those things. So are people running out of lanyards, or they can't get the supplies to cover the guardrails, or they don't have good signage for their barricades, so they just do the best they can with what they can find on the site. You can it's leadership's responsibility to remove all those obstacles from people and make sure they're trained to use the controls.
Great. Thanks, Arnold. So I encourage everyone who is online to still submit your questions. And Aditya, if I could ask you to look through the list and prepare some more. But in the meantime, I would like to quickly show you what we're going to do after this event. So we're going to have a networking reception inside our Drops Metaverse app. And in order to join that, you'll need to go to the website dropsmetaverse.org/apps, and you will find the apps here, which you can download on the Windows Store. You'll be taken to this link, the Microsoft Store, and you'll be able to install the app here. It says Get here. Obviously, when I continue this, it opens up, and I've already got it installed on my computer, so I wouldn't need to install it again. I can instantly open it. But for you, this process is going to take a little bit longer. And if you're on a corporate computer, this is probably not going to work because you need permission to install software. So in that case, I would just recommend you try this a different time. But once you open up the application, you need to create a username and password if you don't already have it. Then you can log in. You can customize an avatar here, and say change a bit of the hair, depending on how you'd like to look. And then you join the session here. You basically come into a conference room. And that's how we used to have our Drops forums in a conference room like this. Now currently there's no one here. Later on there will be a few more people. And the way to get around is just click on the screen, move around. But actually the first time when you do this application, you'll be going through tutorial, so you learn all that. You join a table here. And then if someone else joins that table as well, you'll be able to have a discussion with them. So our next webinar will be with the students from the IDC PDEU student chapter, and they have developed a scenario inside this application. So definitely for that one, I'd like to invite you to join that as well. You'll find that on our LinkedIn page now, and we'll be doing a lot more activities inside that application with them. But for now, just give it a try, and then hope to see you there for a chat. So let me just unshare this. And with that, over back to you, Aditya. Have you found some
Yeah,
questions we'd like to cover?
there is one interesting question. So it's posted by Majid Barka. He's trying to ask that from drilling rigs in Libya, where there are a lot of dropped issues with the issues related to dropped object. I think that's what means. So started to add inventory to all expected drop material, train people on how to deal with material in high locations. What other steps can we do? There's a bit of advice trying to seek.
Yeah.
Arnold, if you,
So,
yeah.
so thank you, Majid. And once again, I'm not quite sure if you got something specific in mind or not, but let me try my best with that one. So, as far as the I guess the risk from equipment at height, of course, and I imagine being in the drilling business, you're familiar with the drops organization resources there. Some fantastic resources, about reliable securing and also how to systematically do your inspections and repairs such that you hopefully catch things before they actually fall. So if now obviously starting an inventory of all the material at height is probably one of the first steps there. Training people is another one. So if you haven't addressed the other aspects, particularly the reliable securing piece, because that is the part that is the most effective if you can get something installed robustly and correctly from the beginning, then the likelihood of it falling will go down. That's a bit more difficult on an existing facility, better than to do that from the beginning. But if it is, you can get those things upgraded or fixed over time. And then the other is if you've got the inventory and people trained, is to look at your inspections. So are inspections systematically scheduled? Are they risk-based? In other words, is the frequency kind of proportional to the amount of risk caused by that thing? And once again, or are the inspections a bit ad hoc? One of the excuses I quoted in that introduction I read is and that I heard from some inspection managers, right? It's like, well, we don't have a specific program for that, but we've got a lot of inspectors out there. They'll find those things. Well, it's hard to find those things if you're not actually looking for them. Most inspectors are out there looking for very specific things because they're very important. And so if you look at all the drops materials, that covers that as well. So that covers the static type drops. I presume you were trying to address. If you're addressing other things, obviously, if you have people working at height and that sort of thing, then you've got a whole different suite of controls that you need to look at.
Yeah. So we got another question from Riaz Mohammed. So we have not heard from drops incidents quite a while in our rigs. Are we in a comfort zone? How is the overall frequency of drops incidents globally in jackup and land drilling rigs? Is there any data available with the drops forum? I guess part of that question you could kick back to me, Arnold, if you want, but maybe you want to give it a shot first.
Yeah, I don't have the data, so I will kind of kick that back to you and see if you have anything, or maybe IADC has something, but I will address the concern there that's kind of underneath the question, I think. And to be honest with you, I would almost say it doesn't matter that much. You the battle never ends. That's what makes safety management so hard. We've been dealing with these hazards for hundreds of years, and still people get hurt. So your rigs get older. You bring in new contractors. You bring in new rigs that maybe you don't know. You have people turnover. You have different priorities that may squeeze out the emphasis that you put on dropped objects. So things are always changing around you, and So, I wouldn't use the lack of incidents as an opportunity to reduce your rigor. I think you need to maintain the same thing, and or otherwise it will creep back up and get you.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, comfort zone is yeah. You talk about quite a bit in that book, and I think at some point you say that yeah, if your compliance with preventive measures is at 99%, maybe you should question that because it's usually not completely true. But I have seen some drilling contractors who are really very rigorous and indeed have reported zero drops in many years. But then the opposite is also true, whereby companies report zero incidents for a long time, and then something massive happens, and then when you look back, it actually turns out that well, they were just not really reporting it. So yeah, it's good to figure out in which category you sit there.
And the other
Um,
piece to that is to you kind of alluded to it, but is to look at the leading indicators as well, right? So look at all those things that you think your people are doing, and measure how well those are being done. And if there's some slippage there, that will show up in the lagging indicators or the drops or the injuries eventually.
yeah. Um, I think we have time for two more questions before we close. Aditya, do you want to study
Yeah,
if there's anything left on our list that we want to cover?
we have got an interesting question from Abdul Rahman Khalid. So it's specifically to Arnold. So he's asking, from your point of view, Arnold, why don't universities focus on teaching, providing lectures or programs more on dropped objects in safety courses instead of normally going about prevention of slip, trips, and falls in general?
Yeah, very very good question. And once again, one of the reasons I wrote this, and you know, in one of the chapters, I talk about what makes so stopping dropped objects so difficult. And I have a whole chapter dedicated to that. And I actually, I think posted that on LinkedIn, so you can get a copy of that whether you buy the book or not. But one of them in there is that they're, for some reason, and I don't really know why. It kind of baffles me as well. But not just so universities, but also regulatory regulations. We have hundreds of pages on confined space and working at height, very specific, detailed requirements. But dropped objects, hurt or kill, similar numbers of people, in especially in construction industries, for instance. So, but when you look at a lot of regulatory agencies in the U.S., of course, this is true. You find a lot less coverage of the dropped objects hazard, and I guess maybe part of the reason is like I said earlier, it's so diverse. It's kind of hard. I can see if you're a regulator, it's kind of hard to regulate that and to put things in place. And because of that, some companies, maybe don't cover it as detailed as they do some of the other ones that have regulatory programs. And I think same thing applies to universities. They probably focus on the same thing. I am starting to, I don't know, as I get more engaged with the LinkedIn community, see um, some newer programs dedicated to, some of these construction type hazards like dropped objects. So that makes me a little optimistic that maybe this will improve. And I'm by doing what I'm doing, trying to increase the awareness. I have, including with people who run those types of programs. So yeah, and you can, yeah, please help me out with that and spread the word yourself to help it get a bigger profile.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think we're past 8 p.m. Already. I think we did have some more questions, but I think there's the majority of the people who are actually watching this will be not watching this live, but will be looking at the recording. So I would encourage you, to continue post your questions. Arnold mentioned he is active on LinkedIn, so he will continue to watching this stream and be answering your questions. So yeah, with that, we're coming to a close. I would really like to thank you, Arnold, for spending the time writing the book. There's easier ways to make money than to sit down and write this, definitely. But I think it's a really good addition. So for anyone who is in this field, kind of a must read. So thanks really for putting that together. Um, Aditya, thanks very much for helping me facilitate this. Especially since all the technology went wrong at the beginning, got me totally stressed out. But you're having me back there and helping facilitate the Q&A really was a big help. So thanks for that. Before we go, do you have some final words, both of you?
No, just once again, thanks to you and Aditya for facilitating this, and overall Drops Asia for being a very active and engaged part of the Drops organization, keeping the community. I mean, I've haven't been able to tell through all the comments, or I haven't seen the list of participants, but I suspect we have 5 of the continents represented here, even though it's in name Drops Asia. So very, very wide reach. So keep up the good work. Thanks to Mike and DropSafe for continuing to sponsor events like this, and also to provide some of the tools and equipment that people need to implement these controls. Without all that, it would be much more difficult. And thank you all for taking time out of your day, and continue um, to fight the battle in your organizations, increase the awareness, coach people, coach leaders to take the next steps, and best wishes in your endeavors.
Excellent, thank you. Aditya?
Thank you, Anand, for sharing some valuable insights throughout the session, and Huachim for organizing this. My just short message to the wider group is that we need to be the catalyst to bring about a change. We did talk about that. Where do we stand now from where we started? Where are we? The fact of the matter is we have still not achieved what we want to. So there is a way to go forward, and we can achieve it only when we take some concrete actions toward it. And when I say we, it's all of us present here today. So that's all from my side, Vachim. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks all. Great for having you all. Thanks to the audience for your active participation. Keep the questions coming. Thanks again to Mike and DropSafe for the sponsorship. And have a look at our Drops page on LinkedIn. The registration for the next event is already open. Following this, for those of you who've installed the software, we look forward to have you in the virtual networking reception in the Drops Metaverse. Have a good evening, good day, and good morning. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.